Welcome to this online community conversation where we will be discussing what is I. For people who don't know me, I'm James Barbieri, Associate Program Director at the Party Center, and I'll be your host for today. Today with me, we also have Eleanor Pete, Program Director of the Party Center, and Maureen Doolan, who's co-founder of the Party Center, who will assist me and you in this phone call. Before we begin, I'd just like to give a couple Zoom rules to have this session nice and smoothly. First of all, during the presentation, we ask participants to turn off the microphone just to ensure a better audio quality. For this reason, if we hear some background noise, we may mute you, but this is not to silence anyone, it's just to ensure the audio quality.
You're off the table.
We also ask, we also welcome everyone to turn on your cameras, as we believe that, seeing everyone's faces and reactions creates a nice environment, nice friendly environment. For later, if a participant would like to ask a question or make a contribution to the discussion, you can use either the raise your hand function on Zoom, which should be enabled. Otherwise, if you could just physically raise your hand, I'll spot you and you can turn on your mic.
Turn on the camera.
Finally, I'll just mention very briefly that this session will be recorded for archival purposes. This will be uploaded very soon, so anyone can watch, as this is a free call. And yes, that's it for the rules. Let's begin with the session. The online community conversation is an opportunity for the Party Center community to meet and discuss together the topics that have been brought forward by our presenter, Yuriko Sato. The session will be divided in 3 parts. First, we'll have a 20-minute presentation by Yuriko. Then we will have 20 minutes of breakout rooms where we can discuss in smaller groups what has been discussed, what has been proposed. And then at the end, we will all meet back together and share our thoughts, bring forward our own ideas, and discuss them. And now let me introduce our presenter, Yuriko Sato. Yuriko is a Japanese Jungian analyst and psychotherapist based in Switzerland. She has a private psychotherapy practice in Zurich and Bern, and is a training supervising analyst at ISEP Zurich, the International School of Analytical Psychology, Zurich, where she teaches on topics such as Eastern and Japanese psyche, narcissism, and psychiatry. Today, she will talk about the topic, what is I? And now, over to you, Yuriko. Welcome.
Thank you, James. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I think I'm relatively new to this community, so I'm so honored to be amongst so many people. So today's my maybe 20 minutes or so talk is about this question, what is I? So when you ask yourself, who am I? Maybe it's easily you can answer something like I'm psychotherapist, or I'm the mother of so-and-so, or I'm an artist. But this question, what is I, is not easily answered. What I mean, I in this question is pointing to my being as a whole. This includes everything, maybe my consciousness and the unconscious body, and also maybe many other elements too. So in any way, the I who is here, everything contained in myself. So one can say this I is filled with things not ordinarily known to me. We use this word I without much reflections, as if it were completely self-evident. And actually it's not. And Japanese Jungian analyst Hayao Kawai, he posed this question in his book, Buddhism and the Art of Psychotherapy, and he dedicates a whole chapter to this one question. So I was inspired by this chapter, so I just brought up this topic. I want to begin with the Japanese some example as some food of thought. So I'm Japanese, and having been living in Switzerland nearly 20 years, and I have become more and more aware how different my way of being in the world. Of course, I'm also one of this in our time. So to some extent, or in some layers, I have also this modern Western psyche too. But also I'm aware I'm very Japanese somehow. And I noticed these differences. For instance, I have a Western husband, Andrew, and for instance, if he asks some questions, it can be a simple question, something like, would you like to call our friends couple to meet up this weekend? And this is a simple question, but my typical answer would be, yeah, can do. Would you like to? So Andrew would be irritated, and he would say, I'm asking you, is it yes or no? So of course it might be part of my indecisiveness, but I can see my Japanese-ness. When I ask this question, I try to think from the many angles, from many standpoints. Of course, for instance, my first reaction might be, I thought I can catch up things this weekend. And then, but if I say no, would Andrew be very disappointed? Another thought would be, of course, it would be nice to see our friends, but do they want to do too? And even if they said yes, is that too much trouble for them to make time to see us? Or it might be very Japanese, but if they have to say no, is it easy for them to say no? Because Japanese don't want to say no very often, but this is another thing. So in this way, I try to think in many standpoints, my standpoint, Andrew's place, and our couple friends' standpoint. And so simultaneously, I have to see many angles. Then it, of course, takes time, and then Andrew will get irritated. So if you stand in one single standpoint, it would be easy to say yes or no. But it seems, as a Japanese, I really have this multiple angles simultaneously. Then it takes time. This is also seen very often in a Japanese politician. Japanese politicians are often criticized. They don't take strong standpoint. So that is also same thing. Yeah, so in this way, also I have to say, this is not the which way is better or worse. It's just I want to illustrate. There's two different modes, for instance, and also interesting German English I and the German ich is always I is capitalized. Somehow Western I is a strong and articulate to compare to Japanese I somehow. And the language too, another example is language. There are many ways of saying the first person singular in Japanese. We quite naturally use one suitable form of I according to the situation and according to the relationship. And also we use not also, and we use form for I for very close people from, I don't know, with family or friends, or when speaking publicly, we naturally use different I, or there are a couple of I only which males use, men and boys use. So many first singular person, first person singular, and also in the second person too. Of course, like in German, you, sie and du, polite form sie, and close people, second person is du. But in English, it's only you. But so there are other language who has this several different nouns, pronouns, but there are so many I form in Japanese language. So it's really, in a way, I is it's like a wandering eye according to the field. So this is one other example, and it is not directly about I, but there was a very interesting experiment I saw in a Korean educational TV program. In that research, the researcher gave a camera to university students from various nationalities and asked them to take a photograph, take pictures of your friends. So they did, and they came back. And the results are, it seems the Western students take picture of friends pretty much like a face, or from the chest up to face, this type of photograph of friends. While the Asian students took the picture of friends from head to toe. And not only the whole body, they really try to see the balance between this whole friend's body to the background. So somehow, not if it's a relationship with this friend and the background and also ratio. So in a way, they capture friends, including background. So this is just one other example. Somehow Western's mind, at least this experiment, Asian mind see maybe I and you, other person, different way. So now I would like to, seeing these differences, I would like to reflect on a Western notion of I, which is probably perhaps a default mode of in our time. As I said, I also have that Western part in me too. So it doesn't mean I'm Japanese, totally different from the Western psyche. I don't know how, but I have both, and maybe I have many. So my very first German teacher, Matt, told me several times, German ich is different from English I. So he swelled his chest, and then in a bit assertive tone, ich, he said, ich. So I think he intuitively grasped this notion of I, ich, in German word. It's very much correspond with the Freud, Sigmund Freud talk about ich in his work. He put ich and es as a part of oneself. In a way, he separated oneself as a ich and es. So it is in English, I and it. It is a more impulsive, intuitive, in a way you can say instinct, intuitive part of personality. So he somehow put this two separate components, I and it. And when it was somehow introduced to English speaking world, it was given this ich and es were given the Latin equivalent. So it was translated in ego and id. So this, of course, psychoanalysis has so much contribution to understand human psyche, human relationship and behavior, but somehow giving this Latin word like a ego and id separating oneself, then in this way somehow the that by using such terms give the impression psychoanalysis, psychology is as if they were like a branch of natural science, and a patient's psyche can be objectively observed. So it isn't. Psychoanalysis is started as a self-analysis, but somehow in this way, the emphasis was given to ego, and ego somehow, kawaii, Japanese analysts also pointed out, somehow think of I and the ego identical is somehow reflecting so much the mode of Western thought. And of course, this way it's a powerful, this is a powerful I. With this I, we developed our science and technology, and it has so much contribution. But we have to think of this strong I in a way discriminating this differences in between these differences between things is by doing this natural science developed, and this Western consciousness also refined. But it seems that in Buddhism, they refine their consciousness in a different direction, in a way using consciousness more and more, somehow denying these boundaries between things. Kawai proposed the image of saying that deepening the level of consciousness. When you think deepening the level of consciousness, you might think, oh, this is unconscious. But no, when you think of mindfulness or deep state of meditation, you know it. Somehow there's a consciousness is still there, and then careful attention and the concentration is still there. So, but somehow it's in my image like an ego is not speaking, but consciousness definitely there. But in this state, somehow, if you take down all the boundaries, Buddhism often talks about nothingness or emptiness, but this nothingness, emptiness doesn't mean there is no thing. It's opposite. When you take away all the boundaries, this nothingness contains everything. But in Buddhism, also they say everything exists interdependently. No single thing exists of its own. It is called interdependent origination, dependent co-arising. It's called many names, with many names. But so if everything exists according to their relationship, So if one constellation changes, everything changes. So in this view, in a way, there is nothing like I. There's no such a thing like I exist only of its own. This is Buddhism view. When I have been thinking of this kind of difference, and I somewhat try to convey this Buddhism view, when I try to explain this, somehow I know it is very difficult to understand intellectually. So maybe many of you are participated Lee Nichols' seminar presentation, Entering Bohm's Holoflux, last month. It was highly experiential and experimental. He illustrated how and how much we are locked in our own self-image in a closed circuit. And it is not only about self-image, but I thought of this experiment, and he brought up the Rio Soma. He invited us to exercise to get back in touch with our own flowing body as holoflux, which is unbroken wholeness in our reality. So like his exercise, I realized this is also one way of thinking of this question, what is I? It is not, it is also somehow body and experience has to be involved to tackle this question, I think. So it was really inspiring how he brought up and somehow invited us to somehow loosening up our concept or notion of I. This was one approach, and one in very important approach I found. This is almost what I wanted to say as a food of thought. Yeah, with all given this, somehow I put things as somehow material to think of this question, what is I? Yeah, so what is I after all? What is it? Yeah, I can talk about the picture I put with my with flyer, or maybe I can talk about this photograph later. So yeah, I can end here. Is that okay, James?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you very much, Yuriko. That was really insightful. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So yes, I guess we can move on to breakaway rooms. We'll be divided basically in rooms of maybe 4 or 5. We'll see now how it works out. Of course, if people don't want to really join a breakaway room, you know, you can just take a break, 20-minute break. When you see the breakaway room invite, just press cancel, and you'll just stay here in the main room. So yes, enjoy your discussion, and we'll see you again here in about 20 minutes. Yes, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good 20 minutes, a good discussion.
We have, James. Thank you.
Great.
Seemed very short.
It was a little too short. Yeah.
Well, I mean, this is opportunity to maybe discuss it further. Maybe we can start with if someone would like to share what has been discussed, and maybe we can exchange some ideas. Would anyone like to start? Peter.
Yeah, sorry. I just felt like just mention something which I'd be keen to hear. Talking about the I and realizing that the I is something which is relative, but it's not. The individual is connected to everything, as we know, obviously from David Bohm's philosophy, that we're all interconnected. And I believe it's true that in Japan and in Asian countries that people are much more connected to their families in particular. It seems like in the West, we're moving further and further away from that we're becoming dissociated from our families. And I presume that years and years ago, it's very similar in the West, that families live together with grandchildren and grandmothers and great grandmothers and everybody living in the same place together. I assume this happens more in Japan and other Eastern countries than it does in the West. Is that still the case, do you think?
I think are you asking me?
Yes, in
Yes.
particular.
It is happening also in Japan. The families are somehow, the value of family is going down. And it is, it is sad, but this is the reality. And for instance, woman in the family has been taking care of the parents-in-law, and then, but they themselves getting old, now children left home. So they really somehow, to complain about and sad about it. I took care of my parents or parents-in-law, and now look, my children. So our family systems are changed.
Yes.
Good.
Thank you.
I want to add something. This is Andrew, the irritated husband who Yuriko referred to in her talk. I think a bigger difference is the importance of the ancestors in Japan, because the Japanese culture is built on the presumption of reincarnation, which throws a whole other spanner in the works of who am I. So the reverence for the ancestors is really front and foremost in Japanese society.
Ah, yes, that's very interesting. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was part of a fascinating conversation. I think the eye of David Pete was very much present in these conversations because people were so open in sharing very, very personal details. It felt as if I was part of a family of friends that met for so long. So that eye was very present. And the conversation was really about some moments in people's lives in which that eye or the consciousness of the eye changed suddenly. A car accident, a death, being sacked from a job that was the love of life, really from a structure that you thought you understood, having that disruption that then calls into play a different kind of thinking, a journey towards really discovering what this I is, and actually finding out that the original I that one thought one had is very, very different in reality. And the second item that arose a lot was the influence, how much influence from others is actually then touching our personal I, and that interaction is becoming stronger and stronger and more violent and more rapid and fast, and therefore has a stronger and stronger influence. And how do you manage that came about, but it was really beautiful.
Thank you, Daniel. Would anyone like to actually respond to that? And not necessarily Yuriko if you don't feel like it, but anyone else?
Yes, I'd like to respond to the remark previous to that and ask Yuriko's comments. Having the benefit, Yuriko, of two cultures, it seems like Western culture has moved from being John the baker to being John and whatever consumer products John uses. John the Cadillac man, John the Brooks Brothers suit wearer, John the Pepsi drinker, and we're more than willing to affiliate with these and be complimentary of describing ourselves as the products we use, of what we consume. And I would appreciate your comments, Yuriko.
Yes, some I don't remember who said that, but somebody said we are becoming who I am, but becoming what I have. Was it who was it? I forgot. I think
Eric Fromm talked about to have or to be, and he talked about the mode of having is being one mode, which is very consumer oriented, very content consciousness oriented. Nouns begin to dominate the language. It's very about have, I am have, what I have, as opposed to the being mode, which is about being present and alive into the present.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I think in analysis, I often talk about being and doing, but having is a really problem, isn't it? More than somehow worse than doing, if it's just having is the identity. Yes.
Thank you.
I can see, did Christopher Hawk have his hand raised, or?
Hi there. Sorry.
Hi.
Yeah. As we had Andrew and wife on then, it struck me when you were speaking about I at the very beginning with that very domestic, lovely example of Andrew asking you, shall we, get these friends over, and all the things you went through. Now, what makes you think that is more a Japanese difference rather than the fact you're a woman and men, pardon, men approach things in a very hard and fast way. It's a gender sort of induced preference, and women are thinking all the angles you said, and yet you're attributing it to you being Japanese rather than being a woman. What do you think of that? What does anyone else think of that?
Is there anyone?
No, you say first. Andrew looking at me.
It's interesting question. When I studied at the Jung Institute in Küsnacht in Zurich, of course there are Japanese students are there too, but somehow Japanese women feel very free being in the West. We don't have to take care of others anymore there, especially when we left everything in Japan and came to study all the time. It's only for myself very often. But then somehow Japanese men, not everyone, but there was a tendency Japanese men are not capable to swim through this new somehow culture, because nobody is now taking care of network, taking care of him. Like in the typical way, in a party situation, if somebody is alone, maybe if it's in Japan, it doesn't have to be woman, but very often women go to a person somehow standing alone, say, who are you? What are you doing? And so somehow woman maybe take care of the field. But so men are somehow used to it. So when Japanese man came to the West, then he didn't have that base. Then I think it was more difficult for men, I thought.
I imagine, but what you were talking about was a sort of super empathy or super broadness of whose desires are going to fit this situation that I think women are in the West, and no doubt in Japan, are brought up to be very sensitive to, whereas men are not brought up to be sensitive to that. And so they can act more linearly and more directly. And I think a lot of that is behind the differences rather than, and I think maybe then it may be enhanced by a Japanese woman difference, but it is primarily a gender difference in sense of I and where one is placed. What do you think?
Could I just add that there are many more marriages between Western men and Japanese women than between Japanese men and Western women. Make of that what you will.
Make of that what you will. Yes, I agree.
Not just Japanese, but Asian in general.
Ah, interesting.
Yes.
And what's your point, guys?
May I introduce another conversation?
Yeah, please speak.
Oh, yes.
Jean wants to get in there.
I just wanted to add to your question associated with gender difference or that sort of perception. Now, the gender seems to be a bit disappearing and becoming so fluid with the new generations. And so maybe you could just add that in remarks, if that is something to be highlighted in samenesses and differences.
Yeah, up to now, it's been associated with anatomical men and women, and these days it's not. I agree.
Yeah, I think it's definitely important to note that. Yes, thank you, Özlem. I believe, yes, Jean wanted to ask a question. Oh, you're just muted.
No one. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think Yuriko raised a very valid point. I've always been accused of being very direct, but nearly everybody I talk about when I talk with other friends and having people over and so forth, I never would have thought of the three things that she did, whether it was appropriate for them. I think she's raised a very valid point there, that it's not, it's a very distinct difference. I was just very curious about something, the little I know about Japanese culture. I was telling in my small group that when I had Japanese students, I immediately went to a Japanese teacher and said, I need to learn Japanese so I can talk to them. In the beginning, they would arrive in America with no English practically, and in 2 months, they were fluent in English. I was not fluent in Japanese in 2 months, but one thing I remember saying something to my teacher, and she said, you cannot address me that way. And I said, but I'm older than you. And she said, but I'm your teacher. So there is a hierarchy in Japanese. And what I wondered was, what does that do to the concept of I in Japanese culture? If Yuriko would like to speak to that, or is that something that doesn't exist, that sense of when one addresses somebody that you have a concept of a different relationship?
This is definitely in our language. Of course, when I talk with much higher, not, or doesn't have to be authority, but the teacher, then if I humble, I to maybe use not only different I, but the in the sentence, there are so many ways of saying things more politely. Of course, English you have too, but in Japanese has much more somehow complicated system of expressing more humble way. I remember my parents dropped out of religion completely. It's a typical after the Second World War, they were children and they were taught before the war, the emperor was a god, and then after the war, now he's a human. So in a way, they really somehow, one generation really completely somehow dismissed from the religion. But my grandparents kept this traditional somehow religious attitude, and somehow I learned from only, I heard this super polite form from my grandmother. When grandmother was preparing things for the family altar, I was a small kid and around her, and then so when she talked about God, for instance, in English you can say God do this, or that's very simple sentence, but the super polite form, only she used the verb, the different mode to describe what God deity does. So in this way, in the language, it's really built in your attitude is really, when you hear the sentence, you can feel this.
Oh, that's very interesting. I also, when Andrew was saying about the ancestors, I was thinking we were the original nuclear family in America. There were no other relatives practically. And I remember when my mother would talk about the grandparent, oh, you're just like so-and-so in the family. I treasured that. I still think of that today, 80 years later. I'm like so-and-so. So the I is much bigger than just whatever concept I have it. I have some belonging to other people as well. And that also is part of my construct, my ego. Thank you, Yuriko. Thank you.
Thank you, Valjean. I believe Lily has a contribution to make.
Oh, yeah, I have a question, if I may. That was a fascinating talk. Thank you, Yuriko. You mentioned this sentence, if one part changes, everything changes. And it immediately made me think of synchronicity. And I was just wondering if you think that within Japanese culture or religion, there's sort of a greater room made for synchronicity than perhaps in the West?
The frequency of synchronicity is talking about frequency of synchronicity is very hard. So, but I don't think this is so different. And we also, Japanese, of course, respect these synchronistic events, and with really, really numinous experience around it is the same perceived in the West. But I exchanged a little bit email with Shantena recently about, but in Japan, in Japanese psyche, mind and matter are not so clearly separated. So in this way, when synchronistic event happens, we take it just so, or it of course happens, this kind of attitude. So we are not so curious about why and how synchronistic events happens compared to the Western psyche. The attitude and effect of the synchronistic event is the same, but we take it somehow more natural occurrence. That's maybe the difference.
I look forward to hearing more about it from you, Yuriko, in the synchronicity course, which everyone is encouraged to sign in for.
Yeah, I mean, we're not in a position yet to announce it, but yes, something to do with synchronicity is coming. Just moving on, we have Frank has a contribution to make.
Yes, hi. Yes, Yuri, I just wanted to know, I find it interesting that you say that synchronistic experiences, encounters, or happenings are not as given as the people don't focus on them as much as as they do in the West, where people go, wow, I can't imagine. I was just thinking of you, and then you call up on the phone. There's much more kind of a sense of amazement. And I wonder, is that because in the Eastern understanding of how that things are seen as arising together as opposed to cause and effect? So does that make sense here? The one I'm asking, I'm just wondering if there's much more of a sense of a flow, that things, of course, the fact that things are happening at the same time is much more part of the way sort of a Japanese might understand reality, as things arise together. So left doesn't cause right. Let's say in the political sphere, left and right arise together. They're not two separate things. It's not like left causes right or right causes left. Or the hippies cause the cops, or the cops cause, these things arise together. So I'm just wondering if that's more of why in Japan around synchronicity there's much more of a, well, this kind of, yes, of course, this is part of nature or part of reality.
In a Japanese worldview, it is, of course, we are maybe one of the in so-called advanced country, nation, but we still keep the older worldview. As I said, mind and matters are in many ways not so clearly separated.
Right, exactly.
So in this way, the world is still enchanted.
Yes, yes.
So in this way, a sense of wonder, we still, to some extent, of course, it depends on the person, but to some extent, this sense of wonder and enchantment, enchanted world, we can mutually maybe feel. That's why maybe we are not somehow so wow kind of, yeah,
because the wow is there just in reality.
Yeah,
in a
wow
sense.
can be more like a calm sense of
Yeah.
wonder, probably.
Yeah. Yes, yes,
Yeah.
very nice. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Frank. Ali, you have your hand raised.
Thank you. I just want to simply be in the wandering eye space as we each look at these little squares, and that the words that we have listened to, at least here in the big group, but also in the small group, in the me that's a member of this large group now, feels the enchantment of these potential connections. And I just particularly wanted to enliven further that unfortunately we're not seeing us all in our full context. We just see mostly heads and little pieces of fragments of our contexts. And I'm curious in the statement of these wandering eyes and what Yuriko said about how the Asian communities take selfie and friends pictures with all of the body visible and all of the context visible. And so I'm just really curious about how we all might use our full bodies as we move into the future together, and what might that feel like, and what might some of the opportunities be like. So I'm sitting here in a chair and I want to get up and move with you all and see what happens when that goes. So I just take a bow to that potential space as it opens.
That's lovely.
Thank you, Ali, for that. I think Mary Lou, would you like to come in?
Hi, sure. Thank you. Thank you for the talk, Yuriko, and those comments I'm following were lovely. I just had a question about shadow in the Jungian kind of perspective and how you might view that coming into the eye with shadow, and also from a cultural differences standpoint, the shadow and collective shadow aspect of it. Thank you.
Difficult question, but important question, shadow.
Well, just to help, shadow is everything you don't identify with. It is almost like the non-I. Should we start from there? That's the Jungian position. It's your non-identity. What do you think?
And which,
sorry.
And which at the same time might be what you need to recognize as being you to work through.
That's right. That's right. It's part of you, but what you don't identify with as I. Yeah. That's the tricky thing.
It might not be direct answer, but when I was thinking about this question, what is I, and then taking somehow, okay, so I changed the formulation. For instance, in a working place, we have a small conflict, for instance, with colleagues or something. The most big stand, somehow firm stand I take, conflict somehow escalate. I'm more excited and more angry, and why don't you understand this? And so I'm beginning to learn more about Burmese dialogue. I'm very beginner, but somehow taking down this somehow strong boundary, it's me and this is not, then in a way, in this way, my shadow I might put outside of me, but actually it may be part of me. But so in this way, maybe shadow or whatever, somehow loosening what the I is might help to really see this shadow.
I think you're very right, because, you know, in the Western way of holding strong to a singular I, or everything that's in the shadow, not I, as Shantina says quite rightly, is part of us, gets projected out onto the other, gets projected out onto the world, and so is seen out there and not owned. Whereas if you have a broader image, sense of I would have thought that would make the concept of the shadow not nearly so needed and nearly so problematic as a Western, which Jung was, view required. That's very interesting.
Yeah. Would anyone else like to contribute, even following up on this idea of the shadow?
Paul has his hand up.
Yes.
I'll put this in my words. The shadow, if you know that you have a shadow and you look at it and take it in, that's one possibility. If you deny it, the denial is expressed as projection. Everything that I am, but am uncomfortable with, don't like, do not want to admit that it is me, I push out from me, and that allows me to escape it. I draw a line, a boundary that Yuriko is so well described in the Japanese notion of we are so sensitive to boundary. And I can't get beyond this. I'm just aware of this. I'm sorry to inject a political note here. It may be inappropriate, everybody, please. But this is the phenomenon for me of Trump in the United States. His unwillingness, inability to recognize or see that there is some part of him, he just refuses to look at it, will not acknowledge it. That refusal to acknowledge part of who he is gets pushed out. And I would like for somebody else to comment on this, if this is in anyone else's mind.
Nothing wrong in taking an example from the culture. And yes, Trump is a very psycho-diagnosable fellow out there in the culture who is demonstrating an awful lot of this sort of behavior. Of course he is, of course he is. I mean, when he talks about fraud, on one hand, he accuses others of fake news. Then he talks about fraudulent voting in a fake way. That's pure shadow behavior. And a narcissist like him is unaware of many sides of his nature, I'm sure, including his shadow.
But could I just add that Trump is a symptom, not a cause, ultimately, that what he's doing is immensely popular because he is enabling everybody to do that collectively.
That's what I was going to say. He was elected.
Yes.
That's right.
People decide to somehow. That's what they have. Each have to look into it.
Could I say something outside shadow, which is that in our little group, we discussed dreams quite a lot and the nature of the dream ego. I think because there were rather a lot of Jungian analysts in our group. And something I didn't mention there, which I think is interesting, is when my daughter was finishing primary school, about 10 years old, she had two friends, close friends, who are identical twins. And one morning they woke up and one of them said, I had this incredible dream, but I couldn't remember the end of it. And the other one said, tell me the dream. And then she did. And then she said, oh, I can tell you the end of that. So that's just another erosion, if you like, of this rather tight boundaried sense of I that we have.
Absolutely, absolutely. And all those studies that have shown that identical twins separated at birth have ended up having very similar lives and very similar elements in their lives, like building seats around a tree in their garden and things like that, from the trivial to the very important. It's strange, very strange.
Christopher, to go back to an earlier remark of yours about Trump, in essence, the American electorate elected a shadow.
Yeah, that's what I was going to
say. We've had a similar experience in Italy with a guy named Berlusconi.
And Boris Johnson.
His success was that his message to people was, you can be a bad boy and be successful and get away with it.
Yes, yes, yes.
That is the most wonderful, succinct statement of the reality that has somehow, I like to think, been in my head for about a year, if not 5 years. And the question, and it's wonderful being in this very sympathetic group, the question that comes from our being together here and having this conversation, now what? What do I do? What does anybody do in this unhappy reality where 1/2 of the population of my country has a psychological problem?
Just as we're approaching the end of the session, we only have 5 minutes left. I'll just take one more question. Patricia, you've had your hand up for a while now.
Well, this turns it in another direction, but I find the most pernicious place for the shadow to hide, my shadow, I certainly experienced that, is in my own identification. I mean, it hides in my ego. It hides in where actually I'm very identified. I mean, Trump, I mean, they were moving into real serious pathology, but I think that maybe for a lot of us.
Yeah.
Bruce was trying hard to say something. Could we weave him in?
Yeah, of course. Go ahead.
Well, I was just wondering, following, I think, Paul's point that it's happening in Britain, it's happening in Brazil, it's happening in America, though Biden is back. It's happening all over the world, and that's really serious. And what are we doing as a race to kind of let that happen? Or what could be done to sort of shine some light on it? Because it's extraordinary how it's like a cancer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What's going on?
Yeah.
I think the answer is, the answer. Those who are more aware should take notice of those who do not have a voice and feel they don't have a voice, and so are very susceptible to some maverick who will demonstrate that they give them a voice. That's the thinking. It's all very well us being a little bit psychologically and so on enlightened, but it leaves behind others who would like a voice and like some understanding. and those are the other 50%.
Or more.
Or
I think it's a limbic system problem, and we have to stimulate the vagus nerve of these people who are in fear. It's simple.
Yeah.
I think it also has something to do with belonging. I think people will come together around something they either need, and perhaps that I like the idea, Christopher, of not being heard. So they come together to belong around that want, that deeper need. Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, we only have 3 minutes left, so unfortunately, we have to start closing this session. Yuriko, would you like to just say a couple words just to finish, if you have any?
Thank you. No, it was really great pleasure. Somehow, I was very nervous. Somehow, I don't know if I can. It's only 20 minutes, and just presenting food for thought as a just like a how do you say, aperitif? Yeah, aperitif. But I was so, yeah, it was so, how do I say, I'm so much rewarded by all the feedback, and also, of course, that question doesn't have a one single answer, and it's somehow open and touches many elements of our another questions, or yeah, and so in this way, I was really so satisfied, and I'm very thankful to hear all what you said. Thank you very much.
Oh, well, thank you, Yuriko. Thank you very much. It's been a really fantastic session. And thank you to everyone who contributed to the discussion, and even thank you for people who maybe stayed silent and just listened in. I would like to extend a great thank you to everyone. We've had a great turnout, and it's been fantastic. Before we go, I'd just like to make a couple announcements about the upcoming events. First of all, I'd like to extend a great thank you and an update on 2 ongoing events that are going at the moment at the Pari Center. After the 4-week program in October, Lee Nichols' Entering Bohm's Holoflux has been extended for a further 6 months, where they'll be meeting monthly, every month, to explore these ideas even further. This program has made it's been so popular and active that it was with great requests that this program had been extended. So for that, I'd just like to thank Lee Nickel for making that possible. Well, I also like to note that Dave Schrum, Carolyn Pollack, Manfred Kitzler, Beth Mays, some of them are here with us today, are entering their 3rd week of their online Bohm Dialogue. The Bohm Dialogue is called "Is There a Different Way to Talk Together?", which has been really great success. They're entering their 2nd half of the program. And finally, I'd like to informally announce, just because it's not on our website yet, 2 events that will be running in December. So the first one is on the 6th of December, which will be a launch of a new series that will run, well, the idea is all year long. It will run once a month, and it's called Flicker and Reality, Exploring Ideas in Film and Television. So in this free series, we will have a presentation by a special guest who will analyze different themes in different film or television series, and then we can discuss them together, same as we've done today. The first one will feature a presentation by, well, me, where I'll be analyzing the themes in the 2020 series Devs, and where I'll be looking at ideas that the show proposes, such as quantum theory, determinism, and faith in science. The second event that'll be running in December will run on the 12th, and will be a single session with Oliver Freire Jr., who's a historian of science based in São Paulo in Brazil. Some people may know him. He was in our online summer series exploring Bohm's ideas. And in this session, he will be looking at a historical account of paradigm shifts, and he will try to give informed speculations about where the next scientific breakthrough will happen. And the title of this event is, What is the Next Scientific Breakthrough? As I said, these websites aren't up yet, but they will be very soon, hopefully by the week. So yes, as always, to contact us, you can visit the website on the Contact Us section, or just email us at either james@parcenter.com or eleanor@parcenter.com. And again, finally, thank you so much for everyone for joining us, and we'll see you again soon here at the Party Center.